So today, as Ingo talked about, we're going to talk about perspective taking and choosing curiosity over judgment, and how these concepts are really maybe needed more now than perhaps ever before. So I'm coming to you today from my guest room. Today was the first day my kids are going to be doing online school. So I have 4 of them, a 9th grade, a 7th grade, a 4th grade, and a 1st grader. And so the older 2 are kind of functioning fine. The younger 2 have been, figuring out how does this look and how do you practice music class when you're at home and no teacher. And I suspect many of you are in that same boat. So one of the things I thought was really interesting that I saw online since all of this unfolded, and I think as we talk about perspective taking, we'll start off with some empathy for ourselves, right? And I thought this was really funny. So this diagram of an attention span of people on Zoom, and only 2% of our attention actually lands on the meeting content. So I don't for a moment expect you to stay fixed on this the full hour, right? You can watch the video later if you happen to get interrupted. But what I thought was really funny about this, and maybe the the one that I thought, oh wow, has my neck always looked like that? So I've been conditioning. My neck always looked like that. The others I feel like are a little less interesting to me. I don't have a cat. I do have a 90-pound dog that might bark occasionally. So if that happens, it's a shameless plea for forgiveness there. So as we think about perspective taking, certainly as we're living in this online community now and trying to lead organizations and lead teams and lead our families and try to figure out how to do many, many things at once, I thought this was an interesting way to kind of kick us off. So feel free. I'll send a PDF out. Ingo, you can help me figure out how to do that at the attendees. I'll send it to Ingo and he can make sure that it lands to you. So feel free to swipe this image. I did the same thing from the web and thought it was really funny. So I know in the pre-work we talked about having a sheet of paper and a pen or pencil available. And so what I'd like to do is start off with this exercise. And I know some of the names and faces I saw pop up perhaps have done this before. And I'll offer them an alternate one as well once we're through with this to consider with their teams. But if you want to grab a sheet of paper and just quickly draw what it looks like to make toast, whatever that means for you, right? Whatever it means for you. The only caveat is no words. Oh, I love that something as simple as 5 letters. Toast has 5 letters, right? And that we heard from people who have completely different sketches and interpretations of what that means. And so for something as simple as spending 3 minutes drawing a toast sketch, we can learn a lot about the different perspectives that come to life. And I've done this exercise all over the world, and some of you have been a part of those sessions. And invariably, there's such a variety. So even if there's a room, which doesn't happen often, where everybody does draw a piece of bread that is browning in some way, sometimes they have 1 step, 2 steps. I had a guy in Asia once who drew 22 steps. And you go, holy cow, right? He started with planting the seed for the wheat that would ultimately become the toast that's in your kitchen and figuring out a way to get it browned. So our lenses and our perspectives are so different. And so if you're looking for a simple way to evoke those multiple perspectives, maybe within your team, we've just demonstrated this is something that works just fine virtually as well. How do you bring this to them and start the conversation around, wow, what's going on with you? What's your reaction? How are you engaging in this moment? What do you need? What are the feelings that are coming to life for you? What are your many interpretations of whatever the toast is in your organization? So you can use that as an example, but I like that it's a way to have us jump in and quickly do something. So now that we know a little bit about our perspectives, I thought I'd give a little bit more background on kind of who I am and how all of this came to be that we're together in this virtual call today. So I'm coming to you from Cincinnati, Ohio. This is a picture from the South Side, which is where I grew up, also known as Northern Kentucky. But when I give that talk around the world, people say, oh, Kentucky Fried Chicken or oh, Kentucky Derby. And I'm like, not exactly. So I'm about 15 miles north of the city now. And I'll start with the tree in the middle, and that represents when I got kicked out of kindergarten. So I went to kindergarten for 2 weeks and got kicked out for telling other people what to do, telling the teacher how many minutes you had left to work to teach, and doing other people's work. And so I got sent home, and the governor of Kentucky had to decide what to do with me. So I was home for 2 weeks, much like our scenario that we're living in now, only that now is a little bit longer. And he said, fine, it's okay to go to first grade. So I like to think I've been in the business of challenging the assumptions since around about 1980. And so that's going to set the tone for of what I do. And so then I'll fast forward a little bit to the little girl here with coins. Funny, my first grader was counting coins like this earlier this morning as part of her math assignment. And I didn't think about that till this moment. Using this image for some time, and it represents my middle school experience where I was running a pen and pencil rental business. I had one of those really nice couches, and I would loan my stuff out, I wouldn't get it back. And so I thought, wow, this has to look differently. Clearly there's an opportunity. How do I commercialize this? So it was 10 cents a minute to rent a pencil and 5 cents a minute to rent a pen. So that entrepreneurial thread and spirit kind of continued throughout my life. And then I went to P&G in 96 and left in 2018 and had a whole bunch of roles in that time, primarily focused on the innovation space. And Ingo and I had some time together there as well, which was really great. And then went to open my firm, Ampersand, in the upper right in 2018. So and my family is down here. This is where we should have been flying home from yesterday in Colorado skiing, but that was all kind of canceled. That's our usual spring break trip. So all of us on top of the mountain, hope to be back there around about this time next year. So that's my kind of life story in 6 images. Maybe another tool to use with your teams as you think about perspective taking, and pay attention to the idea that I started with those early life experiences. Maybe you invite your team to think about what in your early life experiences have allowed you to get to where you are today, or have really kind of been a common thread or a theme that shows up in who you are today, or how is it showing up in how you're handling this moment. So some visual stimulus there too helps, in addition to the kind of audio storytelling. So with that in mind, as I mentioned, I had lots of innovation roles at P&G. One of them was leading the design thinking effort there, and that's how Ingo and I came to intersect. And so this model for me certainly has grounded me in innovation, but I think it's also something that's important for lifestyle design. And how do you think about bringing these principles to life every day? And so today we're going to talk a little bit around empathizing and defining, and how those can really shape our ability to understand and to appreciate the perspectives of others, particularly in times of crisis, and also to step into the space of curiosity and allow that suspension of judgment. I know often we are educated, socialized, and then I call it corporatized to be right more than we are to be curious, right? We've been rewarded over time to, great, you got a 96 on the test, and that means you're better than the person that got a 94. And hey, you got promoted faster, that means you're better than that. And I feel like a lot of those stories really cause us to step into the space of judgment really quickly because we've been rewarded for doing it. And what I've seen in the teams that really get the most profound results, whether that's in innovation or in the organizational strategy and trying to really get better outcomes, they pause and they say, I'm not sure I agree. Can you tell me more about that? Or, wow, I haven't thought about that before. And so we'll unpack some of those concepts as well, but really playing in this empathize and define space today. And so when you think about perspective taking, much like the toast exercise, how we look at a situation, how we look at a problem, how we look at a solution often informs our next step, right? Whether that's how do we respond, how do we really describe the problem, how do we explore what's possible, how do we experience constraints. And we think about really jumping into that. I love that we had 3 very diverse post sketches to kind of set the stage for this concept. Empathy often informs the frame. So maybe it's the approaching the evening for you, Julia, in Europe, yeah? And maybe happy hour is on your mind. Really different than if it's morning for you in San Francisco, right? And you're thinking of your morning toast. So empathizing with what is it like? Oh, she's got her glass. Cheers, Julia. Well done. Yeah. How do you sit in that space and say, oh, this might be different than the experience I'm having, but it's no less valid for them, right? And when you're thinking about going after problems, how might we have this conversation in our teams, right? Using those words. It's not how do you, or how do I. It's how might we, and how do you establish that level of connection and relationship and appreciation for the perspectives of the people in the room, really from the beginning of that. So I think that those guys set that up nicely. When we think about empathy, I don't know how many of you may have seen the clip from Brene Brown. I was on a Sunday night show here in the US just 2 days ago, which was really nice. But she talks about her work in empathy and vulnerability and shame. And when you think about empathy, empathy is really stepping into someone else's reality with a lot of vulnerability and openness as well, right? So going beyond kind of just reading the data, but reading the room and understanding the faces and trying to tap into what's really going on for them. And even if it's completely different than your own reality, how do you appreciate it nonetheless and feel what they feel and tap into that connection between the head and the heart, that it's not just a heady experience, that it is something that can dive in deeper and they can drive some connection there too. And this is a slide I use often when I think about empathy, because often it becomes a whole lot easier to empathize with someone and to take a perspective if you can see who they are. So those of you who are on video, thank you so much. It makes a huge difference for me as the presenter. And I hope that it allows you to connect with other people virtually in that way as well. So if you think about having a call with your team, the access to the eyes, the ability to see people nodding and to connect and to drive that energy forward is really so important. It's really different if you know, I can't tell you how many times I've had calls at 10 p.m. with my iPhone in my back pocket and I'm on mute and I'm checked into the call, but I'm folding laundry or unloading the dishwasher, right? And not really into it because there's not that contact with the eyes the same way there would be in a face-to-face meeting. Video conference allows us to go in and engage more empathetically with our teams and to understand the perspectives. So the more you can get in front of people, if you can pause and have a video chat with one of your direct reports, or to bring your team along and to really kind of give them the opportunity to each share their perspective, to share their voice, to ask some really great open-ended questions as a leader, you can get there a lot faster. And maybe some of you have seen this before as well. It's a tool called empathy mapping, something we use in the innovation space quite often. But what I like about this specific template for empathy mapping is that it's grounded in questions. So if you think about people that you're trying to understand better, to understand a different perspective, to understand what their experience looks like, here's some questions to consider. So you think about the say. What do they share with you directly? What do they say in their words, right? Maybe what do they post? What are some things that maybe you've heard them in passing kind of connect to in those ways? But these are some questions that I think are really useful as we try to dive in and understand each other. One of the things that I would do is to map out some of the people that I either had working with me or people that I really needed to influence, and tried to understand, wow, what does it look like to be them? What do they need in that moment? How can I be as supportive as possible? And what this does is it physicalizes that experience, right? So how do you get it out of your head and onto the page such that you can iterate and refine on that? You can scratch out, you know what, I don't think that's true anymore, or maybe I was wrong here, and engage in a more thoughtful way, such that when you need to have a conversation, you can kind of pick up where you left off. And you can step into what does it look and feel like for them in that moment. And I'll give you an example. If you were to do empathy mapping with, say, a new hire, I'll say new hire Nicole for a moment, right? What does new hire Nicole need that might be different than retirement ready Ron, right? And so when you can dive in and sketch out what those experiences need to be, or what those mindsets are, what people are feeling, I bet you can better tailor your communication. I bet you can better empathize with what do they need in those moments. And even if you have one consistent message to communicate, maybe the how or the why or the what becomes a little bit different there, as long as you're kind of holding true to what you're aiming to communicate. I like that you hit on the points of, what are some of their barriers and what are some of their motivators. I think those are important as well as you listen to people and even as they're answering the questions in kind of the think, feel, say, do space. What are those drivers? If I think back to, new hire Nicole for a moment, maybe one of her motivators is to make a big splash as she takes on a new role and to be impressive or to gain credibility. And maybe retirement ready Ron is looking for, hey, I need a thoughtful sense of where are we headed. And while I thought I was retirement ready, maybe I'm not. Maybe I need to last for another year or two, given some of the shifts in the market, right? There's just some different concerns that he might have versus kind of new hire Nicole in that space. So how do we come with a perspective and an openness to hearing different points of view along the way? So I'm going to send along a template that highlights this as well, but I'll also offer the sketch version of this, which is if you turn it kind of 45 degrees, it becomes a 2x2, right? This one just looks like an envelope because it looks nice on the PowerPoint, but there's a 2x2 version that works just as fine too, and it's the think, feel, say, do, and the pain and gain again at the bottom. Feel free to sketch it on a whiteboard, in a notebook, right? On a Post-it note. Anything that you can kind of get your hands on, you can do the same thing. Don't feel like you need to have the template available to do that. All right, so I'm going to move on from empathy mapping. Here's an example of a persona, which might also be a value-added sketch for you to pull together. In this case, Hilda, what's going on with Hilda? She wants to build a company. She reads a magazine. She's looking for investors. She's single. She's 37. And we probably know a lot of the people on our teams and in our personal life more deeply in this space than what's demonstrated here with Hilda. But how do you make it kind of come out of your head and onto the page, and the value of really sketching that out and coming back to it? I think this is a really important exercise to keep alive at this moment in time. And given what I said earlier around, we don't know when we're going to be physically in the same room together again. How do we not forget some of those moments? My first grader this morning, her music teacher assignment offered, you need to practice the songs we were going to have in our musical, which has since been postponed indefinitely, right? And my daughter said, I can't remember one of the songs. And so we get going with, some of the words, and she comes back and she's like, oh, now I remember. How could I have forgotten? Because they practiced it so much, right? And I think we have the same tendencies because those are human things. They're not just first grader things. And we can forget some of those things that emerge over time as well. So sketch them out. What are those things that are important that make that person so special and unique to you that you need to really be mindful of before time passes and maybe you forget some of those things that are important? And so as I think about kind of moving from empathy into problem definition or problem framing, I think part of perspective taking involves stepping into this space where we can assume the lens. If we were to put on someone else's glasses and look at the world through their perspective, their lens, that's another way to talk about perspective taking. And this game called Kerplunk, we used to play this in my grandma's basement when I was a kid with my cousins, and now it's come back. And the idea of Kerplunk is to have these sticks in to not let the marbles fall. And so when I think about perspective taking, I think about this game. In fact, I have some in my garage that I've used with teams in the past. I'll put one on a table. And whenever we can get around a table again, maybe that's something that you'd want to try. But why does it matter? I'll have teams pull out the sticks. And sometimes the marbles fall and sometimes they don't. But I ask them, how did you know which stick to choose? Well, I wanted to make sure that I was going to choose one that wouldn't let the marble fall. Well, what did you have to do that? I had to look around and I had to go around the cylinder and figure out which one looks like the safest one to pull, right? What are they doing? They're taking the perspective from the other side. They're intentionally looking to say, what am I missing? What do I need to consider that maybe I haven't thought about already? So I think there's a lot of inspiration in these everyday kind of experiences. In this case, a game from childhood, right? But how do you step into that and to be mindful of those perspectives? And so maybe you even, snap a picture of a Kerplunk and stick it on your desk, or draw it out on a Post-it note, the cylinder, to consider these other perspectives, just to be mindful of, what are those cues that work for you? You'll know better than I what they are. But how do you step into that space and allow that stimulus and that inspiration to continue to invite the perspectives? This is another one that maybe you've seen online in the past week or so. And it's about perspective taking too, right? Your grandparents were called to war. You're being called to sit on your couch. You can do this. And that in its own right is an exercise in perspective taking. One perspective of the grandparents, one perspective of us in this current moment. Although what I struggle with when I read this is of minimizing our call to sit on the couch, which certainly isn't being called to war, but it feels like, right? How's that show up, right? It's not that it's not struggling for us. It's not that there's not a challenge there, but it's not being called to a physical war. But this is also about framing and positioning. While it was really, really a traumatic and emotional experience for our grandparents, maybe less so if we're being called to sit on the couch, but how do we dimensionalize that and still take that perspective along as we go? So I suspect more and more of these things will emerge as we continue to navigate our way through this moment of uncertainty as well. One of the other ones that really hit home for me, and I suspect some of the other parents, were it's day 2 of homeschool, and I've had 3 kids suspended, and the teacher was fired for drinking on the job, right? So, again, those perspectives of how does it start to come up. I think keeping that perspective of humor is also really important. How can we kind of see these moments of, oh, this is really funny? And I had a friend who sent me a text saying, hey, how are you guys doing? And I said, oh, we're fine. I said, I'm well stocked on toilet paper. If you decide, you're running low, let me know. I'll drop some off and put it in your mailbox. And she's like, yeah, thanks. She goes, a month ago, we never would have said these things to each other. We would have thought that was ridiculous. So really kind of pausing and acknowledging those moments of perspective, I think is important as well. All right, so I'm going to transition into choosing curiosity over judgment and unpack that a little bit as well, because while it's linked to empathy and to kind of problem definition, problem framing, and lensing, there's some specific points I think that are really important as we start to navigate this time. And so I like the image here because it communicates this space of what is that kind of field of view that we have. And we can have many different interpretations, right? You might say, wow, this looks like a really healthy forest. There's good ground cover. There's light coming through. The trees look healthy. Or you might say, wow, I was expecting conifers or pine trees instead of these deciduous trees. How is that showing up differently, right? So those multiple perspectives, again, do show up. Think about how do we practice curiosity in this moment of uncertainty? Really pausing and asking questions, even the unpopular ones, can be a really great way to say, wow, I hadn't thought about that before. Wow, do you really think that this is what we need to do next, right? And to drive that sense of connection and curiosity. So we're not coming from a place of judgment on driving shame or driving humility or humiliation in that space. We're really coming from a place of raw curiosity, this openness to being wrong, right? I don't know how many of you have ever, failed a test. Generally, when I ask that question to a group, a lot of people come back and say, oh, when I failed the test, I felt terrible. I was afraid. I was ashamed. And often we learn the most from the moments when we're not at our best or when we're failing or when we're struggling. If you think about Carol Dweck's work on mindset, growth and fixed mindset, that space for growth mindset is appreciating the value in the struggle, stepping into the unknown with curiosity, right? I think about Joseph Campbell and his masterful work on storytelling, right? He talks about the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. That's really a message about curiosity, right? How do we push through despite these moments and these signals that are saying, hey, I need to be right. Hey, I need to be on top of my game. Hey, I can't look vulnerable in this moment. And so that demonstration of vulnerability is really important. We're all feeling vulnerable right now in one way or another. We're trying to figure it out. Ingo and I had a conversation before we came on today around, prototyping even this program. And there's vulnerability in that. And how do you step into this space and learn and try and support each other every step of the way? The space for suspending judgment, I think, is really important. And I talked a little bit about that already. But when we think about how many times we've had conversations that maybe you have a different point of view than someone else. Maybe someone is really disagreeing with you, and our response is more like this, right? You cross your arms, maybe your head turns a little bit, maybe you get a smirk on your face, and you say, I don't agree, and I'm angry, and the conversation's over. That's not about choosing curiosity. Choosing curiosity is, wow, I'm not sure I agree. Can you tell me more? And what just happened there? I leaned in, my energy changed, my arms were not crossed. It's coming from a place of wanting to understand versus this need to be right. In a lot of the memes and the stories and the footage that's coming to life in this moment for us around the world, I think we've got an opportunity to model that and to lean in and say, wow, can you tell me more? Wow, what does it look and feel like to be you in that moment? Instead of going, oh, that's not me and I think that's wrong and therefore you're wrong, right? This idea that getting something wrong doesn't mean there's something wrong with you, but this openness to exploring that and challenging the assumptions as we go. And when you think about challenging the assumptions, one of the first steps in doing that is acknowledging, what are they? Let's state the assumptions. What are we assuming in this moment is true? What are we assuming these conditions are? What are you hear a lot about the modelers and the assumptions that are baked into the model. Same things happening in our organizations and in our families as well. My husband is still going to the office, and he's a commercial banker, and he's getting more requests for loans in a week than he generally gets in a year. And one of the things he said, today's the first day back to online school that I mentioned, is, how's this going to work with them, being in school for 7 hours today? And I'm like, oh, let's be clear. The assumption is that they do 90 minutes of work, right? And that's a full school day's worth of stuff. And he's like, oh, I don't know what you mean. And how are you going to keep them in? No, right? Let's reset the assumptions. Maybe the same thing is true at work. Maybe it's not the expectation that you're on for 8 or 10 or 12 hours a day any longer. Maybe there's a different conversation there and recognizing what that looks like. So how do we think about stating the assumptions such that we can challenge them or invite other perspectives on those assumptions as well? So I've got a quick TED Talk I want to share with you. Okay, so that is Derek, and you might think, why are we watching a video during the webinar? I'd love for you to be able to take that, pick it up, take it to your team. Start a conversation around, wow, what are our assumptions? What are those different perspectives that are sitting in the room? How can we welcome them with curiosity and suspend our judgment, and to really start to practice that? And maybe this moment in our world's history is the catalyst for those kind of conversations. But I don't think for a moment that it has to be the one and done, the last moment. I'm hopeful. I was sharing with Ingo that I think there's many bright spots that are emerging in this as well. When you think about the innovators, things that are happening now at record speed because the bureaucracy has no place and no time, and how wonderful that is to watch, and how it's grounded in exactly what we're talking about today. And how do we continue to push through those boundaries, push through those, now what we're seeing and learning are frankly artificial barriers that are holding us back. And the ability to step into our courage and our perspective and to better deliver great outcomes for the world, I think is really unprecedented. And so when you think about being a leader in this moment and driving these perspectives forward and stepping into that space and choosing curiosity, human-centered leaders make a huge difference, right? Grounding themselves in questions, not assuming, one, they know the answer, two, that they know better because they've been around longer or that they've seen more, right? Because nobody's ever seen anything like this, none of us alive, right? Taking this time and to pause and reflect on, what are you feeling? What are you as a leader feeling in this moment as well? How are you learning from these inputs, these different perspectives that are surfacing? And to spend some time reflecting and learning about yourself and who you want to be going forward as well. And these principles that we're talking about today apply to leadership and organizations all over. And so just over the past 18 months, these are HBR articles on secret to leading change is empathy, managing when the future is unclear. Boy, that was pretty clairvoyant, right? If humility is so important, why are leaders so arrogant? We're seeing this shift. The signals have been emerging. We just didn't have the kind of activation energy to jump into those as we have now. So some articles, perhaps, if you want to dive deeper into some of the academic literature in this space as well. But some questions to ponder as we go forward. What other perspectives do I need to consider? Who might disagree with me and why? And then reach out to them anyway to understand, what does that look like? Wow, have I really paused to take the time to think about, how am I feeling and what am I learning? And this one I think is actually most important, right? Because it doesn't matter how often you get it right, it's that you're trying, because we're all on this journey together. Have I modeled for others ways to practice curiosity and suspending judgment, right? Am I sending those signals of, hey, it's safe, right? Grounded in Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety. It's safe to have a different point of view. It's safe to talk about things that maybe are uncomfortable, and that you're going to be supported in this organization and this team anyway. And I'm sharing some more inspiration here. This came from one of my local Cincinnati, Ohio-based friends yesterday. I don't know if it works internationally. You'll have to let me know. She didn't know either. But she set up this text feed that if you text BRAVE to 484848, you get a morning stimulus of courage and inspiration. So think of it as kind of one of the soul quotes of things to offer to really drive persistence and courage and tenacity through this moment. I snapped this photo when I had the opportunity to lecture at Stanford a couple of years ago. And it's a quote that I think of very often when I'm working with teams, and what a opportunity and an honor it is to partner with them, and really reading it out loud when we're standing in a circle. We'll call this our virtual circle, kind of at the end of our day together. It has been such a source of inspiration, certainly for me, and based on some of the feedback, certainly for them as well. It's dedicated to the things that haven't happened yet and the people who are about to dream them up. And I'll read it again, right? Because I get chills every time. Dedicated to the things that haven't happened yet and the people who are about to dream them up. This is what's carved into the cornerstone at the entrance of the Stanford Business School out in Palo Alto, California. And no wonder so many amazing things happen there. If this is the passage you walk by every day and you feel that energy fill you up and to fill you with possibility and optimism. I would think this is one of the things that might show up on that BRAVE text. I might send it to her and offer that suggestion, because it's so rich with possibility. And certainly we wouldn't have predicted the things that are happening now, but each one of us has a responsibility to step into the space and say, what are we going to do to play a role in dreaming up the ways to help us productively emerge better as a result of this thing that was served up to us. So such a pleasure to be with you guys today. Here's my email. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. I feel like there are behaviors that they're grounded in self-awareness. And so the more that you know yourself and you know your triggers and you know the tape playing in your head that maybe was kind of made in early childhood. I mean, I do think a lot of this is grounded on our emergent humanity, even as kids, right? I feel like I was socialized to be judgmental, to not lean into curiosity. It was more important to be right. And it is a conscious thing every single day. And my children would tell you I'm not great at it here because I get so fed up quite often. But I start the day with good intentions to try. And it's not a perfect thing, but I absolutely feel a wall come up when I step into the space of judgment, right? That this thing, I've got my notebook here, that it literally comes up like this in my head. So if I find myself stepping into that, there's hold on, almost like the roadblock pops up. And how do you force that upon yourself? It's not perfect, but it's the way that I've trained my mind to pop up in that way. If you find yourself stepping into the judgment, if you've got a conscious awareness, if you have a self-awareness that allows you to see those triggers before maybe they come out of your mouth, before they are fully baked, right? You can go write them down to get them out, but to try to cultivate that wall And when it comes, pause, right? Pause. Oh, can you tell me more about that? Oh, I mean, it's hard work because I think we've been conditioned to spit out that thing that comes immediately. And often it's, why do you think that? And how can that be? And what, all the face stuff that comes with it, right? And trying to choose, like, I really feel that thing come up to say, stop, and pause. One of them is, what can I do to support you? And I remember asking that. I asked that of every client. I asked that of every person that I was working with in my teams, right? What can I do to support you? I remember one woman, we hadn't intersected in a while, and we had coffee, and she was calling to tell me that she was resigning from her position, and we joined on the same day when we were in corporate life together. And she was crying, and she's talking about her journey and what she was going to do. And I said, what can I do to support you? And then she really burst into tears. And she said, nobody's ever asked me that before. And I said, wow, why? Right? I thought everybody asked that. And she said, no, not everybody asked that. And so I think getting intentional around, are you showing up for people in a way when they need you? Such that, if support is, hey, just take a walk around the block with me at a socially distant walk now, right? Or hop onto a video call with me and just kind of riff through this. Or can I draw you a picture and you can tell me what you think this means? How do we sit with some of those things and see what's possible? The other thing I often ask is, what are you worried about? And the flip side of that is, what's your wildest dreams wish for? Right? What are you so excited? What's your wildest dreams wish for in this moment? What do you wish would be possible? How do you step into that? But then what are you worried about? Allows them that safety and that openness to really kind of go deeper and be vulnerable with you. Maybe it starts with you sharing a story as well.